Welcome, guys. Welcome to Wednesday night. Made it to another week. Excited. I've got, I don't know, 30 or 40 slides of new content that we haven't released outside of our roundtable and our one-on-one consulting clients. So we're going to be releasing this tonight. I'm going to talk about a really, really important concept that every dentist needs to be very aware of as they're coming out of this coronavirus crisis. As you're reopening your practice, as you're getting into the weeds and figuring out, how am I going to reopen? How am I going to bring my team back on? What am I going to do with my patients? What's the communication strategy? All these things, there's an umbrella that needs to sit above all of those questions. And I'm going to go through tonight a matrix around evaluating all of these different factors and trying to understand, where do I really need to be applying my time to make up lost ground? I mean, the reality is we've all been shut down for 6 to 10 weeks, depending on your area, depending on when you anticipate reopening. And the reality is it's highly likely that your market area, depending on where you're at, is going to go into a subsequent shutdown, that there's going to be a spike in this coronavirus stuff that we're dealing with. And I don't know that it's going to be on a national level, but I think it's highly, highly likely that at a local level, there are some market areas around the country that go into a subsequent shelter in place kind of order. And your ability not only to navigate yesterday and today and tomorrow, but also to navigate 6 months or 12 months from now, when that inevitable scenario is highly likely to happen, is going to define your success over the next 1 to 2 years. A lot of dentists I've been talking to are frozen up. They have sheltered in place. They've been in the bunker. They shut off expenses. And now their plan is to reopen. Some doctors have kept their entire team on, some at their own expense, some with PPP funds. They don't even know if they're going to open back up. And essentially, what's happened is there hasn't really been a plan. There hasn't been a significant amount of thinking around what are the possibilities and the likelihoods. There's a really good book called Thinking in Bets. And one of the premise of this book is, the author of this book says that every election, she is, thanks, Dr. Kelvin. This is called the Corona cut. When you get tired of trying to figure out how to cut your own hair, you just buzz it all off. This lady that wrote this book, Thinking in Bets, says every election she's astounded that there is half the population, or roughly half, that is completely outraged and can't believe that the election went the way it did. And the other half is elated and happy, of course. And she references the most recent election of Trump and Hillary. And election night, for those of you that stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning for the outcome of that election, half the country was absolutely beside themselves that Hillary could lose and Trump could win. Yet there was a known 50% chance, flip of the coin, that either one of them could win that night. Now, okay, you might say 45-25 or 40-60 or whatever the case may be. If there was a flip of a coin probability, if I flip a coin here, I don't even have a coin here nearby to reference. Anyway, if I flip a coin, who's going to be upset with me that it lands on heads or tails? That's a ridiculous statement to make. And what this book talks about is we have to think in bets. We have to think in likelihood and risk in evaluating situations. And if we don't, what we end up doing is we end up having a lot of certainty around what we think is going to happen, and we run down that path and we have very little clarity. Oftentimes, certainty and clarity are inversely proportional. When you're extremely certain something is going to happen, oftentimes you have very little clarity that you're about to get sucker punched in the face, right? Proverbially speaking. when you have a very high level of clarity, oftentimes your certainty is low. And because your certainty is low, if you're not certain on how something's going to happen, you start preparing and having clarity around all these crazy scenarios that can happen. And what I've seen with a lot of business owners and doctors is they have a very high level of certainty on what they think is going to happen. Some are, oh gosh, there's going to be all this pent up demand. Some say there's not going to be any pent up demand. My hygiene's going to be dead. Other doctors say, I'm going to make the same amount of money I did this year as I did last year. And others say, I don't, it's not possible. And I think the only thing we know for sure, I can say with 100% certainty right now, is everything we think we know is wrong, me included. I have a very low certainty that I know anything that's going to happen. I do have a very high level of clarity around all the possible outcomes in front of me and what I think are all the possible outcomes and what I'm going to do in each scenario. Regardless of what you think of Rudy Giuliani today, September 12 of 2001, Rudy Giuliani was regarded as a national hero. And when asked about Rudy, how did you respond to the World Trade Centers having two planes flown into them and all this craziness that happened, Rudy is credited with saving tens of thousands of lives that day from subsequent issues and all kinds of what we now know as history. And Rudy was asked, how did you respond so quickly and so effectively to a situation that nobody dreamed could happen? And Rudy said this: down at City Hall, we had a war room, right? We had a room that whenever there's a crisis, everybody comes together. And in this war room, they had something like 65 different scenarios for when the proverbial poo hits the proverbial fan. And they had scenarios for poison water supply. They had scenarios for high-rise buildings on fire. They had scenarios for subway bombings. They had scenarios and prep plans for a nuclear dirty bomb being detonated in the harbor, being detonated in Manhattan or New York Harbor up there. And they had 65 or 70 of these different scenarios, these horrific scenarios that they had planned for. And Rudy said, when 9/11 happened, we went into the war room and we pulled out all of our plans and we just kind of started mixing and matching things. We just started mixing and matching things. And because they had the plans, nobody had the blueprint for 9/11. Nobody predicted that two 737s or 747s, I don't remember the plane, I think it was a 37. Nobody predicted that two 737s would fly into the World Trade Center and they would subsequently collapse. That was not a situation that anybody prepared for. But because they had prepared for 65 other scenarios, they knew what to do. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. Prior to February, nobody prepared for a global pandemic that would shut down virtually all business worldwide. But yet here we are. And what we're finding is much like the flu and the coronavirus are affecting the sick and the elderly at an increased rate, right? We saw it in Italy. We're seeing it here in the US, in nursing homes and other places where sick and elderly are, unfortunately, they're being affected. The mortality rate amongst those populations is significantly higher. And that's the same thing we're seeing in the business world. Those practices and those small businesses that already had problems, that were a little old, were a little sickly, you know, they already had poor cash flow. They already had poor vendor management. They already had too much labor. They already had an accounts receivable that was a little bit too much. And what we're seeing is the same outcome in both these scenarios. And we've got to start preparing and thinking in bets to work through this. And by and large, when when I'm hearing from doctors and they say, Colin, I'm going to make the same money this year as I did last year, I say, great. What's your plan? I'm just going to go kick ass. I'm just going to go do it. Okay, great. How are you going to go do that? Well, we're just going to reopen and we're just going to go do it. Okay. Well, the old adage of failing to plan is planning to fail. And that's the message that I want to leave you guys with tonight. Planning to fail is the same thing as failing to plan. And this COVID crisis is going to change the world the same way 9/11 changed the world. We're never going to go back to a post 9/11 era. We're never going to go back to a pre 9/11 era. We're never going to go back to a pre-coronavirus era. I went to pick up 100 face masks today for our team. And the lady that created these face masks for me, and we got our logo across the front of them, a local gal that did them for me. She, after I pulled up in her driveway, it's a lady I know, she works out of her home, does it in her garage, and she makes these things. She's making them for all the police, all the fire departments, and she made 100 of them for us too. She reached out to shake my hand. And I'm the first person to come in for a handshake. And it just felt different. Something about it was different. And that awkwardness isn't going to go away when you reopen. This is muscle memory is happening here, right? We're all being retrained. And if you have simply shut down your practice and your plan is to go reopen, and you have goals or aspirations, entropy is alive and well. Entropy is alive and well. What you left in your practice is not what you're going to go back to when you reopen. And I'll also suggest that the longer you take to reopen, the higher the likelihood is that you do not reopen. We've seen here in the past 48 hours, J. Crew, J.C. Penney, Neiman Marcus, all declared bankruptcy. WeWork is in a vicious cycle of using their available cash to buy back shares to prop up their declining stock price, because if the stock price falls below a certain number, they're all leveraged up and their loans get called. So they're burning their cash to prop up their stock price to keep their loans from getting called. This thing is just the beginning. And if you have made it to this point, this is really good. You've probably already done some really hard work. You've made some really tough decisions. I mean, this hadn't been a cakewalk for anybody. But I'm going to suggest to you that if you've made it this far, the biggest risk to you is still in front of you. The biggest risk is not behind you already. The biggest risk is in front of you. If you've made it this far, just to reopen or to not reopen, then the last 2 months of pulling your hair out have been a waste of time. And I think you got to get real about that. You got to look in the mirror and really have an honest conversation about, what are my plans for this year? If I'm going to make the same amount of money this year as I did last year, what's going to change? The world has changed around you. If you just go out and play the same way you played 3 months ago, it's not going to work out well. I hope it does for you, but I don't foresee that happening. Tonight, I want to talk about what we call the time-money matrix. The time-money matrix. It's a critically important conversation that I'm having with all of our dentists right now. And before we get into that, I want to make sure everybody's in the right mindset here. I'm going to ask you to really focus on what we're doing tonight. I don't think anybody here is content with the status quo. And if you are content with the status quo, you're probably in the wrong place, right? Everybody here is here because they want something bigger or better. They're looking for some goals. And I'm looking for you guys to give me permission to give you my honest opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. but I'm looking for your all's permission just for me to be honest and tell you how I feel. And I hope you all will be honest and give me your candid feedback as well as we go through the night. Is that cool? Click the little raise your hand button if you're cool with that. Perfect. Love it. Tremendous. That's all I ask. Great. Oh, can you guys see all the little names scrolling down the screen? Is that all? Is that showing up to everybody? Yeah, I think it is. All right, hang on just a second. Let me move this around so you all don't get, every time somebody clicks raise their hand, it shows up on the screen. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. So you're here and so am I. We're both here for a reason. I want to help you figure this thing out so you can get to your goals. And this is going to take some commitment from you. There's going to have to be, if you just get on this webinar tonight and you leave and you don't go do anything, I'm sorry to inform you that I don't think you're going to make a lot of headway with whatever it is that you're working towards. I don't know what you're working towards. It might be more money. It might be more time. It might be more ability to give back to your community, whether that's monetarily or in your own time. I'm not sure where you're at in your journey of life, but the ability to get you to the next level makes all things possible. It creates the bigger, better future, not only for you, but also for your team, which is vitally important. Some of these things may require a change in how you're thinking about things. And I'm going to challenge you on some of your thoughts as we go through tonight. Some of the common myths and misconceptions with some of the stuff that I'm talking through. I think the biggest thing is we all need somebody to be accountable to. It can be your mom, your dad, your brother. It can be the guy down the street. It can be a study group. It can be a round table of like-minded and really smart dentists. But you've got to have accountability. Very few people in the world can be accountable to themselves. It's a very difficult thing to do. And it's also, there's a reason Tiger Woods has 7 coaches. You can't see yourself swing. It's very difficult to correct your golf swing because you're the one swinging the golf club. And I think the biggest thing, and I'm going to talk about this a lot tonight, is the ability to make bigger decisions faster. Takes a lot of focus and a lot of desire to change. So let's jump in tonight. I'm not much, and if you've been on my previous webinars, I'm not going to belabor this goals topic too much. But I do want to do something different here tonight because I want each of you to leave with something written down. I don't care if you write it on a sticky note, on a dry erase board, on the back of a business card or a napkin. But I want everybody here to pull something out. You can email yourself if you want and write down, what are you trying to achieve in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? We're going to take 60 seconds. I'm starting the timer right now. What is it that you want in the next 3 months? This could be a number of new patients. It could be a percentage of your existing patients show up to treatment. We're going to talk about that tonight. This could be an amount of time with your family. This could be a new vacation. This could be donating to some local nonprofit that you're passionate about. I don't know. Again, I don't know where you're at in your journey of life, but whatever you want to make happen in the next 3 months, this is for you. You're not going to share this with me. You're not going to share this with anybody. Write down what you want in the next 3 months. And we're going to start 60 seconds right now. About 30 seconds left. 30 seconds left. Just jot down. high level, what are you looking to do in the next 3 months? If you're already got down what you want to do in the next 3 months, go ahead and move on to the next 6 months. We're not going to take 60 seconds on each one. Excuse me. Go ahead and jot down, what are you looking to accomplish in the next 6 months? 6 months puts us Thanksgiving, Halloween, somewhere in there. What are you trying to achieve? And then I want to ask the 1 year question a little bit differently. I don't want to ask it how it's written here. If we're having this conversation 12 months from today, what has to have happened to you personally and professionally so that you look back and you consider the last 12 months a success? So if we're sitting here, it's May 6, 2021, and we're looking back on the past 12 months, what has to have happened personally and professionally for you to go, holy cow, that was great. The last 12 months were really good. All right, about another 15 seconds. Then we're going to move on. We're not going to, like I said, we're not going to dwell on the goal setting. I just want to start to help you guys create some targets to hang on your wall. The magic in goal settings is that you've got to hang the target before you shoot the gun. You can't go shoot guns or bow and arrows. You can't shoot first and then go hang the target. It doesn't work that way. You got to go hang the target first, and then you shoot the gun. That's how this process works. Some people get confused and they like to hang the target after they shoot. That's called cheating. It doesn't work in life like that. And if you don't write down the goals and you don't have a date next to them, what they end up being is hopes and wishes. So when you can write it down and it has a time box on it, you start to create some power and you start to force your brain to figure out, how do I make this happen? Your brain is an expert at doing nothing. Humans have evolved and have survived for so many years because we are experts at avoiding burning calories, right? If our brains figured out the best way to burn calories, we probably would have all died 10,000 years ago because we would have been malnourished and died of starvation. But our brains and our bodies, we're all experts at conserving energy. And if you give your brain a reason, your brain will find a way to not burn energy. This is just how we're all hardwired. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later tonight, rewiring your hardwiring. You've got to force your brain to think through these things by asking yourself, oftentimes open-ended questions are really good to figure out a problem. So let's jump in here. I don't want to continue running around on all this stuff. You guys got your goals written down. You've heard my monologue here. We're 21 minutes in. We're doing great on time. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Right now, May 6, 2020, we've got all kinds of activity. If you're in a state that's dark green, your state has already reopened or begun the reopening process. Indiana has a 4-phase reopen, and they're planning to be open here in the next, I don't remember the exact plan, very soon. Most of these states are phasing out the shelter-in-place order. And if you're in a state that's light green, that means the shelter-in-place order is still in the future. So a lot of activity is happening nationwide here. Now, the reality is if you've been closed down for 8 to 12 weeks, here's the math of what you have to figure out. If you can increase your collections 15 to 20% for the next 4 to 6 months, you can make the same profit you made in 2020 as you did in 2019. Right? This is math. It's we've done it for a couple dozen of our clients so far. Working out the budgets and putting the plans in place to make that happen. I'll promise you, if you don't go figure out how to do that before you reopen, you're not going to go do it. You've got to have a plan. Are you okay? Here's the question I want to ask. If you haven't thought through the plan, or you don't have a plan, or you don't want to make a plan, then what I'm going to ask you is, are you okay making substantially less money this year than you did last year? That's the question you got to ask yourself. Some doctors I'm talking to sound like it's okay if we make less money this year. I talked to a couple doctors today, and they said, hell or high water, we're going to make the same money this year as we did last year. And that's very possible, but you've got to have the will to find the way. If your outlook is, I'm just going to reopen and we'll see what happens, I hope it happens for you, but I'm not optimistic. You've got to have the strategy in place for your people, your practice, and your patients. This communication and safety strategy is absolutely paramount right now. I've been hammering on this for 6 weeks. And if your strategy around your practice and your people and your patients, if you're not airtight right now with how you're going to relay solidarity and safety to everybody, your team, your patients, the community at large, somebody in your market is going to, and they're going to steal all your patients. That is the least dramatic way I can put how I see what's going to happen. The practices right now that are reopening in the states that are allowing you to reopen are going to take the lion's share of patients. Here's something I'll tell you that I know 100% true. This is fact. No matter how you feel about the state that you're in right now, whether you feel like your state should open or should not open, whether you feel like it's right or wrong to open, whether you feel like it's safe or not safe to open, I can promise you right now that somewhere in the neighborhood of half the people in your state disagree with you. This is almost decided and agreed upon fact. I'm not passing any judgment. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just stating, we've been talking to doctors over the past several days. I'll use Dr. Ron as an example because I don't want to call out specific names in specific states. My dad, Dr. Ron, in this week, 70 of 72 of his pre-appointed patients showed up. He had 2 patients that didn't show up. One of them was a little old lady that hadn't left her house in 8 weeks, and she had intense fear around the dentist. We're in Louisville, Kentucky, if you don't know our market area. The other one was a long-standing A patient that just had a crazy situation come up the day of his appointment. He had a personal emergency. 70 of 72 patients showed up. We're talking to doctors in Texas, in Oregon, Florida, South Carolina, Ohio, that I've talked to in the past few days that are all reporting great show-up rates. Now, everybody has to make their own decision around this. I'm not purporting that I've got all the answers here. What I am saying is you've got to make the decision that's right for you. I've talked to some doctors that are in their 70s and 80s, and they're a lot more cautious about reopening because they are more concerned about their own personal health. And that is completely understandable. There's nothing wrong or right with any of this conversation. I'm just trying to have a real straightforward, honest conversation about what I think is going to happen and where things are at right now. The practices that are reopening are going to attract a lot of patients. There is going to be, at least in the short term, some pent-up demand in most market areas. If you've tuned in for the past few weeks, you've heard me talk about the 2 scenarios I see for pent-up demand. I think there's the scenario that pent-up demand does not exist. And then I think there's the scenario that pent-up demand does exist for a short period of time. And I think there is still going to be a lull that occurs 1 to 2 months after reopen. And I think that's going to be a significant lull, which is why I'm telling our clients, listen, don't bring your whole team back on right away. If you do, you're going to end up going into another layoff or a cash crunch situation. This situation is very, very complex. A lot of moving facets, a lot of moving parts, and we need to make sure we're moving through this methodically and logically. These are the states based on the governor's shelter-in-place order that's expiring. Some of these states, like I said, some of these states have ramp-up plans. Some of them are allowing different things to reopen. Dentistry is thrown into the bucket at different stages, whether it's emergency or elective or all those different qualifications. You know, the CDC guidelines have come out. We've got practices that opened prior to the new CDC guidelines coming out. I talked to 2 of them this morning, and I said, how are you looking at the new CDC guidelines, you know, with all this new PPE that's supposed to be out there? And they both said, we're moving ahead. We can't shut our practice back down because the CDC comes out with a new recommendation. The likelihood that tomorrow there's another recommendation that comes out that differs is highly likely. Congress is talking about putting indemnification. That's not the right legal word. I'm not an attorney. Congress is talking about putting in an indemnification into the next round of funding, which I think is very, very likely to be the last round of funding. This funding gravy train, I think, is coming to an end. And what that indemnification thing is going to do is prevent people from suing over contracting COVID-19. I think that's very likely to happen because this thing is going to turn into a wildfire if they don't. So the reality, back to my original point, these states are reopening. You got to make your decision on where you're at. But if you choose not to open, somebody else is going to open in your area, and they are going to take a portion of your patients. I'm not trying to fearmonger here and say you're going to be bankrupt if you don't open. I'm just trying to be very logical about the situation that's going to unfold. The greatest risk you face right now is not the quarantine, but rather what's your practice going to look like once you reopen? 2020 is going to be the year that dentists start working on their practice and not in it. And we saw this in the Great Recession. Those that didn't streamline and create the efficiency in the systems took 5 to 8 years to recover, right? Practices that did not use the downtime to get more efficient and streamline and get lean are going to suffer for a much longer period of time. And the data reflects 75% of the dental practices that declined between 08 and 12, the bounce back on average was 1 to 2% per year. 1 to 2% per year. And, you know, I think this situation is a lot more complex than 2008. There's going to be a combination of patient attrition, a lot of new regulations that are going to come out of that, patient financial challenges from unemployment, from loss of dental insurance, the possibility, I think likelihood may be a better word, that dental insurers lower reimbursements to recoup some of their lost profits. I think this PPE 2999 code, or whatever the PPE reimbursement code is, I think this thing is a fake out. I think you all just got pump faked by Michael Jordan, and he's about to step aside and hit a 3-pointer right over y'all. Listen, if you guys get reimbursement from the insurance companies, I think that's fantastic. I'm all for it. But I can't see that happening long term. Maybe this thing is a short-term thing to avoid a huge PR backlash against the insurance companies, but the screws are going to get tightened down on this thing in the future. And if you don't have a plan, we're going to talk about fees a little bit tonight, very high level. If you don't have a plan on this stuff, I think your profit margins are just going to get squeezed to zero. Here's what our new patient opportunities look like nationwide. So as part of what we do for our clients, we monitor all of their phones. And we have a team that listens to every phone call that comes into every practice that we work with. And this is the line graph of the new patients that are calling our practices on a daily basis since March 1st. This is as of Monday, close of business Monday. This line, this trend line is headed steadily back up. And there's two really important things I want to highlight on here. The ADA reported that 77% of practices in the United States right now are doing less than 5% of their average monthly collections. Over 3/4 are doing less than 5% of their average. Yet across the SmartBox cohort of doctors, our average new patient opportunities by day never dropped below 35% of the peak, the January, February peak. Those practices, it's just like I talked earlier about COVID. The COVID virus is affecting disproportionately an elderly and an immunocompromised and a sick population. The shutdown as a result of the COVID crisis is disproportionately affecting those practices that were not strong and healthy. And when these states open back up, this line that is already going up of new patients is going to continue going up. And the answer to all this is, what are you doing differently today to prepare for this post-COVID world? How are you going to attract patients? I sent out 10 questions last week to ask yourself and your team around thinking about how you're going to attract your current and your new patients once you reopen. 10 very good questions to think about. And those 10 questions are going to lead the way and determine your success over the next 3 to 6 months. Let's jump into the real beef of tonight. We're going to talk about the time money matrix. Now, the time money matrix is a way that we have found over the thousands and thousands of dentists we've worked with over the past 20 years. Every dentist without exception, and really this isn't limited to dentists, every small business owner falls into one of these 4 buckets, one of these 4 quadrants. The reality of your role and how you operate within your practice, you fall into one of these 4 quadrants. And I'm going to call these quadrants, before I explain them to you, I'm going to call them the A, B, C, D, just to put a letter on them. The A, B, C, D doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean if you're in the D quadrant that's like one step above failing. These are just 4 letters. You can call them 1, 2, 3, 4 if you want to think of them that way. I just use A, B, C, D. Every dentist in every market area of the country falls into one of these quadrants. And each box, each quadrant is defined by 2 factors, only 2, their time and their money. I'm going to explain this whole concept to you, and you're going to self-identify, and you're going to see when I say every dentist, you're going to know which one you fall into. Now, the reality is, if this is a dartboard and I'm throwing darts and I'm trying to evaluate Dr. X, right? I might get a dart that falls up here on the top of B quadrant, and then I might get one that kind of hits down here on the bottom of B quadrant. And if we're really trying to be precise, I need to throw 6 or 8 darts and kind of start to get a cohort of the area that this doctor is showing up in. So this is not absolute, and sometimes you show up a little more towards one side or the other. The reality of the time and money matrix is the truth about money is that there's always more money to make. There's a limitless supply of money out there to be earned. But the reality is, with time, there's not. We all have the same 24 hours in the day. Some of us choose to spend that time in the practice slaving away. Others choose to spend it piddling around. Others are super efficient and produce results that others look at and go, that's impossible. How did you do that in half the time I thought it would take? But truly, we all have the same time in the same day. And how you maximize that time and your resources will determine your biggest and best future. Here in a few minutes, you're going to have the clarity, I hope, which box you're going to fit into. And then I'm going to walk you through what are the common myths and misconceptions of each box, of each quadrant, and what question do you need to ask yourself to break out to the next level. If you're in the C box and you want to be in the B, what do you need to do? If you're in the C and you want to move up to the A box, how do you make that happen? How are you going to rewire your mind to make this happen? At the end of this time money matrix part, I'm going to be telling you about an opportunity to work one-on-one with me and my chief strategy officer as you're reopening your practice and navigating through the next 12 months. If that has interest to you, hang out till the end and I'll show you what that looks like. Let's jump in here. Box B in the top right. So this box is characterized by dentists that are making more money and also spending more time in the practice. So we call this box the practitioner. 60% of the dentists in the United States fall into the practitioner mindset. These are all mindsets, right? You can change your mindset. This is not something terminal that you can't change. The practitioner loves dentistry. He loves what he does, truly loves it, helping the patients, making a difference in their life. And oftentimes that love of dentistry, what caused the dentist to get into dentistry originally, means he spends all of his time seeing all the patients that he can. And many of these dentists, not all of them, but many of them do what we call the volume GP model, right? They're trying to do more GP, more patients in their practice, and they're on roller skates, is what I say. They're flying between rooms. And these dentists are oftentimes highly, highly successful by most definitions. However, they have one distinct shortfall. There's one distinct shortfall that really classifies practitioners as practitioners. And that is that they spend almost all of their time working in the practice instead of on the practice. And many, many very successful dentist practitioners that were killing it hitting into the crisis are now in a very bad spot because they didn't have those foundational elements that they needed to be put in place: cash flow, budgets, expense control, bad scenario, disaster scenario plans, right? The Rudy Giuliani story. They didn't have all that because they were being the dentist. They were being the practitioner, the clinician, if you want to call them that. Typically, the busyness of the practice, of staying busy, sometimes takes your eye off of your overhead, off of creating systems and efficiencies. What ends up happening is you get so busy putting out the fires, you forget to put in more fire hydrants. And making good money, but the practice was in control of them. They were not truly in control of the practice. Generally, the practitioner spends almost all their time treating patients. They're not focused on the practice, the culture, the people, the teams, the finances. That stuff is just stuff that happens in the background. And there's an old adage that you may have heard of: trading time for money. The practitioner is the master of trading their time for their patient's money, right? Who in here wants to be honest? And there's nobody that's going to see your answer except me. Who in here wants to be honest and say they feel like they self-identify as a practitioner? You guys have been really successful. You've earned a really good living. You've helped a lot of patients, but you've really focused in the practice more than you focused on the practice. Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Love seeing some hands go up. Cool. So let's jump forward. Let's talk a little bit about what I call the perfectionist. The perfectionist is in the bottom right-hand quadrant. So this quadrant spends more time in the practice, and they're typically earning less money than the practitioner does. Now, in my experience, about 20% of the dentists that we evaluate fall into the perfectionist bucket. And this bucket we characterize by treating actually less patients, but spending more time on those patients. Now, you might be thinking right now, oh man, I'm treating my patients to a higher level of care because I have more time. But oftentimes that's not the case. In fact, it's often the opposite: treating less patients with less care and often collecting less too. You see, the perfectionist is still plagued by the time for money issue. But one of the real hallmarks that defines the perfectionist is that they love doing everything themselves. Oftentimes, they're spending more time per patient in a way that's not effective at serving and best caring for the patients they have. Now, realize I'm not talking clinically. I'm not saying that great clinical hands isn't a skill to be a great dentist. What I am saying is that if you want to grow your practice, you've got to figure out how to stop trading the time for the money to build the efficiencies, to start putting in the fire hydrants and stop just putting out the fires. Oftentimes I hear a perfectionist say, I can't delegate to anybody on my team. Nobody can do it as good as I can. Anybody ever said that in their head or out loud? They have trouble delegating. They feel like they do it better than anybody else can. Yeah, a couple people. Awesome. Yeah, and like I said, this is around 20% of the dentists that we evaluate fall into this bucket. Let's talk about the third bucket, the bottom left. If you've been around me and you've heard me talk before, you've heard me use the word the Pitlor before. And this, the Pitlor, truth be told, this actually evolved out of a conversation I had with my dad, Dr. Ron, probably 15 years ago. And he was doing something in his practice, and I said, you got to stop piddling around, and you got to go do, I don't even remember what it was. I just remember I said to him, you got to stop piddling around, and you got to focus over here. And this Pitlor has been evolved out of those that spend less time in their practice and earn less money. And it's often characterized by those treating less patients, and they're spending very little time and they're earning a lot less. Now, this archetype is really about 10% of all the dentists that we evaluate. And another way to say this is a lot of times the Pitlor is kind of like a scratch looking for an itch, right? They spend their days treating less patients, taking less time in and on the practice, which means they're collecting a lot less. And in some cases, in extreme cases, it's even an abdication from the practice. They might have lost their passion. They might be a bit disconnected. Maybe they don't see a path forward. A loss of direction in their energy. And they don't see, they're kind of uninspired. Maybe their team has lost the direction too as a result of them. And this vicious cycle isn't just with you and your team, it's also within your patients. And oftentimes patient churn is accompanied by this abdication phenomenon. Sometimes I hear doctors say that fall into this box, man, times have just changed and I don't know what to do now. Or times have, it's not just like it used to be. Anybody feel that way? Anybody practice back in the 90s and wish it would just go back to the way it was in the 90s? I know I got some docs in here that practice in the 90s that'd love to go back to those days. Holy cow, right? I mean, a lot different back then, even the 2000s and the teens. And that's going to be the same way moving forward into the 2020s. Things are going to change. Everything, the only thing that we can say for certain is things are going to change. Change is the constant, the irony of that, right? So the Pitlor is the one that doesn't change. They're kind of stuck, and they may be stuck by choice, or they may be stuck because they're completely unsure on how to move forward or how to get unstuck. And it's a little bit of analysis paralysis, which I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes. But before I jump into that, let's talk about the fourth quadrant, the top left. This is what we call the CEO dentist. And they're characterized by spending less time in the practice, but making more money. They're treating a lower volume of patients, but spending more time in and on the practice and have higher collections. These are the guys that are inspiring and driving the culture within their practice. They have left behind the trading time for money rat race, if you will. Sometimes when you see practices that are growing and you just can't figure out what they're doing, this is the magic that's happening. These guys have figured out how to work less and earn more. And that is a result of having great systems in place. It's having an A players on your team, a team-driven practice, and a leader at the top of the pack. You're the leader. You are the visionary of your practice. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with that role. The CEO dentists are the guys that enjoy all the facets of their life because they're not feeling like the practitioner that's chained to the practice. They're not stuck with toxic or non-productive teams because they've put into place the culture that they're going to need to succeed. They're not hoping things get better. They got a real plan, and they've got the contingency scenarios to move forward. The practice, the people, and the patient are all three cared for. If you didn't see my presentation last week on the 3 Ps, it's a great thing to watch. All the 3 Ps are cared for so they can thrive. The biggest opportunity for the CEO dentist is, how do I put in place repeatable systems and processes so I can grow and scale larger, more locations, bigger locations, and grow my influence to serve more patients? Who feels like they're already here in this group, or who feels like this is where you want to be? Spending less time, earning more money, treating less patients, and doing it in a way that's not just trading time for money. Awesome. Cool. Got a lot of response on that. Great. Well, let's jump in here. Let's start getting into the self-assessment here. This is going to move pretty quickly now that we got the baseline stuff figured out. Which box do you fall into? That's a question you got to answer. On your sheet where you wrote down your 3, 6, and 12-month goals, I want you to write down which one you think you are. You might have some traits that are in the practitioner, some that are in the perfectionist. You might have a couple in both. But as you really think about which tendencies you have, you're going to start to recognize which quadrant is really 80% you. And there's nobody here that's going to tell you you're wrong, right? This is an honor system. You got to be honest with yourself. You can't move out of the box you're in until you're honest with yourself about which box you're in. If you want to be successful at moving out of the box you're in, just go ahead and say, I'm in the practitioner box, or you know what, I'm in the perfectionist box. Or geez, you know, maybe I've abdicated a little bit and I'm kind of in the Pitlor box. And I really got to kick things in gear. I talked to a dentist a couple days ago that he said to me, Colin, you know, I've really kind of laxed in my practice. I've let things kind of go the last few years. I got staff problems. I got patient problems. I got money problems right now. And I got 5 good years left to practice. I need to kick this thing in gear. And how much more honest can you be to tell not a complete stranger, but you know, somebody that you've talked to for less than an hour to really open up and tell that to? I think that took a lot of courage on his part. But by recognizing where he was at and recognizing what his opportunity was, now he's putting his brain to work to fix it. If you don't recognize that you got a problem, you can't fix the problem. That's the first step. So this is all the mindset portion, right? We've spent all this time talking about the mindset. I want to talk now about the skill set. The skill set accompanies the mindset. And oftentimes, the skill set follows the mindset, right? If you got a mindset that you want to have big old arms and all you do is curls all day long, you're going to have a big old skill set of a bicep by the time you get done. And that's kind of how this works. Each quadrant has its own distinct skill set, and it's a very powerful skill set. This is not right and wrong, good or bad. This is the powerful skill set of each box, of each quadrant. The practitioner is the master within the practice. The downside is the practitioner often works long hours on roller skates, right? 2 sides of the coin. The perfectionist is often a master in the art of dentistry, but oftentimes they suffer from significantly lower collections and are ultimately not able to help as many patients because their efficiencies aren't there. They're the artist within their practice, right? The Pitlor, the Pitlor rarely makes an uncalculated move until they are full of facts and details, until they feel like they know everything. oftentimes they miss huge amounts of opportunity because they never swing, right? The old joke about the guy that complained that he never won the lottery, and truth be told, he never bought a lottery ticket. Well, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a lottery ticket, right? Michael Jordan, famous quote, he missed 9,000 shots in his career, yet we don't remember Michael Jordan for the 9,000 shots he missed. We remember Michael Jordan for those game-winning shots that he hit. Anybody watching The Last Dance right now? Anybody watching The Last Dance on ESPN? Awesome. Yeah, awesome. I love the Michael Jordan era. So that was cool to see this documentary behind the scenes. Anyway, let's move on. Even the CEO has their pros and cons, right? The CEO often feels that because they've been very successful with one practice, they can go be very successful with 3 or 6 or 10 practices. And those are two very different skill sets. The CEO has to master the balance between figuring out, how do I grow and scale up, right? The practitioner has to ask themselves, can I afford not to work on my practice today? So let's talk a little bit about this. What is the practitioner? They're the master of the clinical side. Busy, 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 right? I've talked about this a little bit. They're on roller skates, the volume practice. Oftentimes, the practitioner is highly successful. And I use the word appearance, not in a facade way, not in just an appearance, a fake appearance, but they are oftentimes very successfully dressed, country club memberships, all the things, the perks of life, right? The practitioner often gets all those. They have earned a good living. They have a solid practice, but they often work long hours and they're chained to their practice in a way, right? The perfectionist, they're a master in the art of dentistry, great clinician. They take pride in their work being perfect. The downside is delegation is often the linchpin that's holding them back. They also suffer generally lower collections and are ultimately able to help a lot less patients. The question that you have to ask if you're the perfectionist is, what am I not teaching my team to do and why? We're going to get into that here in just a second. The Pitlor, right? Often the Pitlor gets stuck making big decisions because they never feel like they have all the information that they need. Oftentimes, they get stuck in an analysis paralysis mode. And they don't see themselves as being in analysis paralysis. That is an outside observation. But they're missing a ton of opportunities. If Michael Jordan operated as a Pitlor, he never would have taken those 9,000 shots that he missed, because the Pitlor rarely makes an uncalculated move until they have all the facts and details. They have a very high fact finder. If you're familiar with the Colby process, we give everybody we work with Colby's. It's very powerful. If you are a super high fact finder, which a lot of dentists are, there is a propensity to go into an analysis paralysis cycle. And it's often something that you have to start consciously training yourself on and giving people around you permission to break that cycle and start thinking in bets. If I get 80% of the information that I think I need to make the decision, what's the probability that I'm going to make the right decision? Versus, what's the probability if I wait another 2 weeks to gather the rest of the data that I'm going to miss the opportunity? Everybody in here, I don't even need to ask. Everybody in here has missed opportunities because we had the timing wrong. The stock market isn't about where it's going to be at. The timing, the stock market is knowing when it's going to be there. It doesn't matter if I think the stock market's going to 10,000 or 40,000. All that matters is the timing of when I buy and when I sell. And if I don't buy at the right or the wrong time, I'm gonna take a big old haircut on it. And I'm gonna, if the timing's wrong, you're gonna miss the opportunity. The CEO dentist, oftentimes these are business savvy people, right? They often have very successful single locations, but they have difficulty creating consistent success at multiple locations. These are guys that are taking less of their time to make more money, but they often haven't figured out what is it, what's the secret sauce that I did at location A that now I need to take to location B, C, D, E, and F to also make them successful. And that's oftentimes the struggle, is figuring out what that secret sauce is. What are the repeatable systems and processes that I need to have? And that's the magic of becoming a great CEO dentist, is having that repeatability in place. So what's your next step? I mean, we've talked about the mindset. We've talked about the skill set. How about the myths that each of the quadrants tell themselves? Would anybody like to jump into this? What do they think in their own head that reinforces why they are who they are? Anybody want to hear the answer to that question? All right, very good. Let's jump in. What do the practitioners tell themselves? Right? The practitioner is the one that's on roller skates. They're treating a whole lot of patients, very successful. But what's the practitioner tell themselves? The practitioner tells themselves, I don't have time to work on the practice, right? I don't have time to do that culture stuff. I don't have time to figure out my finances or set up goals or hold my staff and accountable and create systems for them. I'm too busy treating patients. This is the myth that the practitioner tells themselves. And the reason it's a myth is because when you stop telling yourself that, you'll be able to break through to that next level. What myths does the perfectionist tell themselves? Right? Each quadrant has a myth. And the secret to unlocking your mindset and your skill set behind this is getting honest about what the myth is, where you show up, and then what are you telling yourself that's keeping you here? The perfectionist says, I take pride in my work being perfect, and I can't trust anyone else to do this. I can do it better than you. That may be 100% true. Doesn't mean it's not keeping you locked into the perfectionist box. What's the Pitlor tell themselves? The Pitlor says, I need more information before I'm ready to make a decision. The thing the Pitlors have to figure out is, why do they always feel like they need more information before they're ready to make a decision? What's the opportunity cost of waiting for additional information? And then what's the myth the CEO tells themselves? This is probably the best of all. I can scale up my practice and scale multiple practices on my own. And that's oftentimes the myth we hear the CEO dentist tell themselves. So let's talk, how are we going to rewire whatever box you're in? You've got some hardwiring in your brain. You got some hardwiring in your beliefs. What do you need? What's keeping you in the quadrant that you don't want to be in? I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to assume that you self-identified to a certain box and you don't want to be in that box. You want to move out of that box. So far you've identified your mindset and your skill set. We've covered the common myths that each quadrant tells themselves. Now let's move forward. What do you need to tell yourself to break out of this and get to the next level? Each quadrant has its own kind of self-restricting beliefs, a self-limiting factor. What are you not saying that needs to be said? What are you not asking yourself that needs to be asked? Let's look at the practitioner. The practitioner who's seeing a whole lot of patients, spending a lot of time doing it and getting a lot in collections, right? They're very successful. They're saying to themselves, I don't have time to work on the practice because I haven't worked on the practice. This is the paradox of being the practitioner. I don't have time to work on the practice because I haven't worked on the practice. The question to ask is, can I afford not to? It's a big question to ask. I don't have time to work on the practice because I haven't worked on the practice. Can I afford not to going forward? Is 2020 and 2021 going to allow me to continue doing things the way I've always done things? I can tell you what I think, but you got to answer that for yourself. Perfectionist. The perfectionist is treating less patients and spending more time doing it and earning less in collections. The perfectionist, how can I still do perfect work while working on bigger and better patients and cases? Who else can help me do this? That's a great question for the perfectionist to ask. If I'm going to be a perfectionist and really be the artist, and that's what I love doing, that's great. I'm great with that. If you want to make more money, okay, how can I go from doing single unit crown and bridge to doing multi-unit or implant or large, deep disability type restorative care? Great. If you want to make more money, the answer isn't necessarily that you have to choose one or the other. If you love being the artist in your practice, how can you go get support around the areas that you need support in? And then what kind of patients do you need, right? Because we got the practice, the patients, and the people, the 3 Ps. How can we go get different patients that are going to allow you to earn a bigger living and allow you to create bigger opportunity for your team because you'll be producing higher revenues? If you're the Pitlor, right? We talked about the Pitlor a little bit. How can you make big decisions faster? That's the best question you need to ask yourself. How can I make bigger decisions faster? And I promise you, if you turn your brain onto that, your brain's going to figure out how to make that happen. If you're the CEO, what's the repeatable system and strategy that I need to go achieve my goals? That's the question to ask yourself. If you want to go treat less patients, spend more time in your practice, and earn higher collections, right? This is the magic of the CEO role. Spend less time and make more money, right? And you got to be honest with yourself. Which box do you fall into? The yellow brick road from New York to Miami looks a lot different than from Topeka, Kansas to Miami. You need a GPS. And if you're not honest about where you're starting in this matrix, you're not going to have a GPS to take you to where you want to go. So, man, we've covered the mindset, we've covered the skill set, we've covered the myths, we've covered the questions you need to ask yourself to break out and get to this next level, the self-limiting beliefs. These are the 4 pieces of the time money matrix. And we leverage this to evaluate our doctors with where do they need the most support? Where do they need the most help? Support, where do their teams need the most support? A practitioner dentist is going to have a completely different team than a perfectionist dentist versus a CEO dentist, right? How do we grow the dentist and the team into being the archetype that they want? And the reality is 2020 is going to be the year that dentists stop working in their practice 24/7 and they start working on it. If we look back to 2008 to 2012, 75% of dental practices did not bounce back well. 1 to 2% a year was the average range for practices that suffered in the last Great Recession. And a lot of those practices did not streamline any systems. They never took the time to work on their practice. What we're about to deal with here is going to be a gauntlet of patient attrition, new regulations, financial challenges, unemployment, lower dental insurance, likely insurance reimbursements are going lower. Lost profits are going to be in abundance. And navigating this whole situation by yourself is going to be immensely painful. Surrounding yourself with really smart people who are going through all these same challenges is going to be a really smart thing for you to consider. How do I surround myself with other highly motivated and smart dentist practitioners and owners that know what we're going through, that we can create a brain trust of everybody that's here so that we can put our heads together and figure out what needs to happen. I think one thing remains true. While the scale and the scope of this financial crisis might be greater than 2008, this one thing is going to remain very true. Those owners and practices who were thoughtful about reopening prior to reopening are going to have a significant first mover advantage over those that ignored it. There's a rule of financial gravity right here. And entropy is alive and well, right? Your practice, if it's still closed or if it was closed, what you came back to was not the same practice that you closed down. And figuring out how do I need to navigate this new economic situation is going to be extremely critical. Now, last week, we opened up our roundtable group, and apparently I made a snafu and I sent out the wrong link to a bunch of people. So we're going to keep this roundtable. I'm offering it here again because I just resend the link to like 40 doctors. So we're going to let everybody here know that we're keeping this group open until tomorrow night, Thursday night. We're going to close our applications to our roundtable group. And we're going to be going through the applications. We've already started interviews this week, and we're going to be making decisions by next week on our roundtable group. And this is what I hinted at the beginning of tonight. Those that are interested in working one-on-one with me, one-on-one with my Chief Strategy Officer, David, on reopening their practices, growing and figuring this thing out, navigating these hurdles. Let me be brutally honest about one thing. If you're listening here tonight and you don't see any danger ahead of you, and you also don't see any more opportunity ahead of you than where you think you're going to open, this probably isn't for you. If you're looking out, if your outlook right now is you're just going to reopen and everything's going to be good and there's no danger and there's no opportunity, you're not the right fit for the group. I would advise you to save your time and do whatever it is that you think is really going to help you to grow and move forward here. For those docs that have already made a commitment to surrounding themselves with like-minded people, we're going to keep this roundtable waiting list open until tomorrow night. And this is a group of innovative and really, really smart dentists that are focused on tackling all these challenges that are in front of us right now. Declining reimbursements. How about increased PPE costs for starters? How are you going to handle those increased costs? How about the patient attrition that you've already experienced or that you're going to experience? Patient financial challenges, unemployment, lower dental insurance. I saw a survey last night. Last night I saw a survey. 72% of dentists had not made a decision yet how they're going to handle the increased PPE cost, let alone all the other decisions that have to be made here in the very, very near future. There's going to be a whole dump truck of decisions that you're going to have to make, a whole boatload of decisions. 72% of dentists haven't even decided on what they're going to do about PPE cost yet. The investment to join the roundtable group, we're seeing a 10 to 20x multiplier in ROI of the opportunity as we're talking to dentists. I think the opportunity is 100, 200. I talked to a practice today that they are a very, very successful chain of practices, 3 practices, and they thought the opportunity could be $100,000 a month by solving the issues that we're going to be solving for them in the roundtable group. $100,000 a month. And for somebody to shoulder this load by themselves, I think is pretty ridiculous. The investment is nominal compared to the value and the future opportunity that you're going to have. And tomorrow night, we're going to be closing this group. I'm going to actually send out the correct link this time. And whether you're a current SmartBox client or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to be going through the curriculum we're going through as part of this group. The brain trust of minds that we're putting together is going to be phenomenal. And I think the reality is, for those that try to go at this alone, when the tide's going to go out and we're going to see who's been swimming naked. A great Warren Buffett quote. This reopen is coming up really fast. And for those that are not prepared for this reopening, we're going to see who those people are when this economy reopens. Just this week, we saw JCPenney, J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, malls. We're going to see WeWork go bankrupt. Richard Branson is no longer a billionaire. Richard Branson is trying to get somebody to loan him money on his private island because it's the last unencumbered island asset that he has. All these guys that we thought were absolutely invincible have been devastated by this storm. The owner of the Houston Rockets, who's worth $4 or $5 billion. He's one of Forbes' richest Americans. Right now, he's trying to raise $250 million on a private memo. No banks will loan him money. He's got no cash and he's got no cash flow. And he's circulating a private memo right now for $250 million raised at 15% interest. He'll pay you 15% interest if you'll give him a minimum of $1 million. And if you got an appetite for risk, I can forward you the memo. Restaurant workers. I mean, there are second and third order consequences that are going to come out the yin yang on this. Let me ask you this question. Here's where the rubber meets the road for the decision I think you need to make tonight. What decisions could you have made differently 9 to 12 months ago to mitigate the pain that you're suffering right now? I think that's a great question to ask. What decisions could you have made 9 to 12 months ago to mitigate the pain that you're having right now? If you don't design your practice going forward to accommodate more situations like this, we talked early in this, there's going to be more shutdowns. This is going to happen again. You can read about it on Forbes, Reuters, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, whatever news network you want. They're all talking about the future shutdowns. There's going to be a flare-up in a shelter-in-place order in the future. The glass ceiling has been broken. In 1979, a guy named Lee Iacocca went to Congress. Lee Iacocca at the time was the president of Chrysler. Anybody heard this story? Anybody heard me tell this story before? This is a great story. Lee Iacocca is the visionary behind the Ford Mustang. And after the Deuce, Henry Ford II fired him in a kind of a public spectacle, even after Ford had record profits that year, Iacocca went to Chrysler. And in 1979, Chrysler was bankrupt. So Iacocca tucked his tail between his legs and he went to Congress and he said, guys, I need $1 billion or $1.5 billion to save Chrysler. Right? If you don't give me $1.5 billion, Chrysler's going to go belly up. And Congress laughed at him. And Lee said, okay, guys, realize you're signing a check either way. You're either going to sign the check to me for $1.5 billion today, or you're going to sign a $3 billion unemployment check tomorrow when I lay off 400,000 people. You're going to write a check either way. And that's the decision you're faced with today. You guys are either going to make the commitment today to change, or you're going to go through an intense period of suffering in the very near future, and then you're going to have to make that decision to change, or you won't be in business. Unfortunately, there are going to be dentists that don't make it through this, just as there are other businesses. All the businesses I just listed, Richard Branson, all these are going to have intense issues in the near future. There's 30 million unemployed people in the United States right now, 35 million maybe by right now. And your people, if you go belly up, all of your staff is going to join those unemployment lines. So let me ask you this. If the glass ceiling has been broken on these stay-at-home orders, just as Lee Iacocca broke the government bailout, and there's been hundreds of companies bailed out since Lee Iacocca went to Congress and petitioned for $1.5 billion in 1979, every government in this country has already broken the glass ceiling on stay-at-home orders. These are highly likely to occur again in the next 9 to 18 months. So what decisions do you need to make today to accommodate that? If 5 minutes ago you said you could have made a different decision 9 to 12 months ago to mitigate the pain you're suffering, Maybe you would have gotten a little more financially fit. Maybe you would have gotten rid of some leverage and some debt. Maybe you would have slimmed down your labor, your staff, and figured out how to get more efficient so that you can not only have more profit, but you can compensate your A players better. You can retain more people. Maybe you wouldn't have bought that second home. Or I talked to a doctor a couple weeks ago that just bought a new jet. Holy cow. He'd love to sell that jet. If anybody's looking for a Honda jet with one of those parachutes that ejects out the back of it, I think I know a doctor that would love to sell one right now. Probably give you a great deal. So if you're looking for a Honda jet, let me know. Yeah, he'd love to get rid of that thing, right? He's paying his pilot $150,000 a year. He's paying 25 or 30, or I don't even know the number. Some obscene amount of money every month on his $4 million jet that's mortgaged up. He wouldn't have bought that sucker, right? But you can't sell it now. So if you would have made different decisions 9 to 12 months ago, then what decisions do you need to make today? Right? And if you're unwilling to make those decisions, it's like Maxwell said, there's no mistakes, there's only lessons. Lessons will be repeated until the lesson is learned. And you know the lesson has been learned when the behavior changes. So if your behavior 9 to 12 months ago is the same as it is today, I'm going to suggest you haven't learned the lesson yet. And that lesson is going to be repeated in 9 more months. If you're looking for a really savvy and innovative and motivated group to hold you accountable and to help you make these changes and make them with what we'll call the easy button, we're going to open up the application and we're going to hold this open through tomorrow. This is actually the correct link here now. This link will work. If you go to bit.ly/SBD app, SmartBox Dental APP, you can jump in there and you can fill out that application. Now, there's a couple of criteria. We're looking to put together a highly motivated and like-minded group of dentists. We're looking for guys that have already built a successful practice but are tired of being stuck in it. We're looking for doctors that are looking to maximize their practice, their people, and their patients to create a bigger and better future for themselves and their team. We're looking for those that are willing to invest in themselves and are motivated by a bigger and better future, that are looking to the future to surround themselves with like-minded people. And we're looking for those that are motivated seekers with a bias for action, right? Once you apply, we're going to review all the applications this week, and then we're going to be reaching out and setting up 30-minute phone calls. On these 30-minute phone calls, we're going to do our interview process. We're going to ask you some questions about your application. We're going to give you all the details and an opportunity to ask questions. This is a highly engaged group, right? This is a 12-month commitment. Over the next 12 months, we're going to meet every month, every quarter, and there's also going to be week-to-week engagement. This is a very intensive group that we're putting together. And for those that aren't willing to make that kind of commitment or don't have time, again, no judgment, but that's not for you. We're going to be meeting for 1 day a month and going through the strategies that are really working and figuring this thing out as we come out of this crisis. And there's also going to be a lot of teaching and curriculum. David is a master at hiring A players, at recruiting, at building out goals and systems and holding people accountable. I've got my things that I bring to the table from working with dentists for the past 20 years and what we've done. And this is a group that's going to have one-on-one access to both David and I. As we're going through this thing, you're going to get stuck at some point, and we're going to get you unstuck. Every quarter, there's going to be a 2-day intensive every quarter. And we're going to go through a 90-day planning process every quarter to make sure you're staying ahead of everything that's going on in your practice. At this 2-day planning, it might be remote or it might be in person. I love face-to-face events. There's no energy like a group of people in a room around a table face-to-face. I understand that may not be possible with some of the current lockdowns that we're going into, in which case we've already invested in some really cool tech to do teleconferencing. And we're gonna we'll do these meetings remotely. We've already been doing them remotely, and they're working out really, really well. It's really, really, really simple, and it works out really well. The engagement's great. If you feel like this is right for you, it probably is. If you're looking at this going, I'm not sure, the likelihood that it's right for you is probably low. Those that know this is right for them know right away. They know they have a bias for action. They know they're looking for a group of like-minded, motivated, very successful dentists to surround themselves with. And they want to jump in, and they know the power that a mastermind and a brain trust can bring to their practice. I mean, we're seeing doctors that are getting $250,000 over the next 12 months, all the way up to, I talked to a practice today that is looking at $100,000 to $150,000 a month in growth from the opportunities that we're bringing to the table. The level and the caliber of people that are in this group is very, very high. And those are the kind of people we're looking to add to the group. We're looking to add a very high caliber of people, of doctors and owners who are ready, who have already built a very successful practice and are ready to jump in with 2 feet. And you'll know if that's right for you. So with that being said, I'll open up to questions here. Feel free to use the Q&A box. Feel free to use the chat box. And we'll make sure we get all the questions answered and go through all that. We're going to get into all the details of the roundtable group. If you're feeling like you don't have all the information, that's because you don't. We're going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of the roundtable group on the call. We're going through the whole thing, and we'll make sure you have all the information. But high level, this is going to be a highly engaged, high-performing, weekly, monthly, quarterly group, 1 day a month, 2 days a quarter, with some weekly touch points. There's team training components that are going to go with this. We're going to be engaging with your team. If you have a partner in your practice or a spouse, I think it would be very, very smart to also include them in this decision because that is going to be very powerful for you to be aligned to make sure that you're running in the same direction. There's nothing worse than running enthusiastically down the wrong way down the football field. And if you and your partner or you and your spouse are running in opposite directions, that's going to create a lot of problems. Cool. So we'll open up this to questions here. Like I said, we're going to leave this application up until end of day tomorrow. After end of day tomorrow, we're going to close this thing down. We've already got somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 applications in as of this morning. I also had a huge handful of emails of doctors that I don't know what happened. I think there was a typo, or I had the wrong letters here. These Bitleys are great, but if you get one letter wrong, of course it doesn't work. So Dr. Kuzi, are you going to set up regional groups? We may in the future. Currently, this is a US-based group that, yeah, certainly if we get regional demand, if we had enough doctors in one regional area, we'd consider doing that. But currently, I think we're all kind of in the same boat with this national crisis, and we've not looked at doing that just yet. Yeah. So if you are already a client, Dr. W, you would still have your contact with your person here in the company for if you're working with us on our patient attraction side. You would still work with your dedicated client success rep on those items. And then you would be working directly with David and me on the roundtable side. So it's really a combination, and of course we're doing a lot of cross collaboration. A lot of times there's conference calls with all of us involved. We do whatever it needs to do to make it work. If my team here is very aligned. All of our client success reps are all. We've got a extensive onboarding program for all of them. So yeah, it's oftentimes a cross collaboration between all of us to make sure that we're getting everything done. Yes, Kuzi. The group we are looking for $1 million to $1.5 million practices and above. It all really depends on mindset, right? Which is why I leave a range in here. When I've talked to practices, if what I hear from them is, hey, I'm going to reopen and I just want to get back to where I was at before. If I could just get back to where I'm at before, I'll be good with that. That's not really somebody that is the right fit for the group we're putting together. So we're bringing in people that have great mindsets, but maybe their practices aren't at $1 million or $1.5 million yet. But they've got their great mindsets and maybe they just started up a new practice or whatever it may be. On the other hand, we've done these groups before where we've got a $3 million practice of somebody that is just super content with the status quo. And both of those situations, if the problems that a $500,000 or $800,000 practice have are very different than a $1 to $5 million practice per location. And this is all like-minded, like mindset, growth-oriented practices that we're putting into the group. Yeah. Dr. W, just shoot me an email, collinar@smartboxdental.com, and we can chat about it. Cool. Any other questions, comments, feedback on this thing? Again, we're going to be turning off the application here in a little bit tomorrow. If you've got interest in this, go ahead and fill it out. We'll get time set up to chat with you and make sure you've got your name in the queue before we close down the waiting list. So if there's no other questions, we will end this. Man, this is the earliest webinar we've ended out on in a while. We've been going till 9 and 9:30 for the last 4 weeks. So this will be the earliest webinar. If there's no more questions, we'll close out here. All right. Well, email me if you have questions. collinar@smartboxdental.com. collinar@smartboxdental.com. Again, the application is here on the screen, and go fill that out if you've got interest, and we'll be in touch. Looking forward to talking with you and working with you one-on-one here in the very near future. Thanks, guys, and keep moving forward.